Welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 167, your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
And me, Ravi Abbott.
And welcome to the first show of April. It still blows my mind that we're now into the fourth month of 2019 already.
It's crazy, isn't it? Have you been fooled yet, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I did get through Monday unscathed. But there is always, in the technology industry, there's always the traditional April Fool's jokes that do the rounds. Google always do, so many every year. The one I really like this year is, though, that they actually put a real-life working version of Snake into Google Maps.
Oh, that's awesome. I actually didn't spot any April Fools, so maybe I have been fooled and I don't know
You
about
are the
it.
fool.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, the one I always see on the Facebook groups, and people were doing it again this year, in the retro selling groups. You must have seen these in the past. It's like, okay, guys, I'm moving away to Spain this weekend. My entire collection, I've got N64 DD system. I've got an Atari Jaguar with CD-ROM. It's all got to go this weekend.
I'm surprised the Dreamcast 2 didn't make an appearance as well, because that's always popping up, isn't it? There's what was it last year? It was Dreamcast on the Switch. That was the thing, yeah.
I mean, there's so many every year, but the ones where people are like, I'm giving away my entire collection for free to the first person who comes to get it. There's a few of them doing the rounds. The one I like best this year was actually from a recent guest on this show, Christian from Perifractics Retro Recipes. He did a video announcing the Commodore Plus 4 Mini. Now, he went to great lengths to do this. He actually got the box, the C64 Mini, reprinted with a Plus 4 on there. He put the tagline, "The world's worst selling microcomputer reborn." And he'd actually done some shrinking down of the case. He went all out with it, actually. And there was bits in there where he's talking about, doing spreadsheets with a joystick and all that. I mean, it was very tongue-in-cheek, but I think that was my favourite April Fool's this year.
That's smart, because there's a lot of mini consoles out at the moment. So doing that, God, Plus 4 Mini.
Yeah, I'd actually buy one because I do like the Plus 4, but I'm probably the only person that would. So if you want to watch his video, I don't know if you spotted any good April Fool's.
So you were actually excited. You were like, yeah, Plus 4 Mini.
Yeah, when I saw the title, I was like, what? I didn't realise what day it was. If you want to watch his video, though, I think that was my favourite April Fool's this year. I'll put it in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, there is a mini console coming out that is not an April Fool, that has been everywhere. I even saw this on the BBC the other day. It was on BBC News on TV.
Okay.
The Mega Drive Mini is really happening, and it looks like it's going to be good. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Now, before we get into this week's show, we've got an incredible guest coming up this week. And we must apologise if we do sound a little bit sleepy today. I think our eyes look a bit like pea holes in the snow, I think is the expression.
Yeah, because we've done another chat with Australia, and this is with Shawn Mills. Now, Shawn Mills is awesome. He's our Sierra expert, and he's basically works for Infamous Adventures. He's done Sierra remakes, so these are kind of like follow-ons of some of the games or prequels or sequels, and they're for modern systems, but he's also writing a book about Sierra Adventures, so his Sierra knowledge is strong, and we're going to be talking all about that amazing company.
Well, we have covered, we had our Low on the show a couple of years ago, and that was really in-depth about Leisure Suit Larry and games like that. This one's going to be a bit more broad. It's covering everything from the early days right through to the FMV era.
Yeah, if you think they went from the really early adventure titles to full motion video, 7 CD-ROMs and full CGI stuff,
So, Sierra, what a legendary company. And like you said, Shawn, he's one of the, I'd say one of the world's leading experts on Sierra. Really interesting. He's got a new book coming out soon, so it was worth the 5:30 a.m. alarm this morning to come in and do this interview, absolutely. So Shawn Mills is going to be our guest. The history of Sierra coming up on the Retro Hour podcast in around 15 minutes from now. Now, this morning when we did get up, the rain was pouring down. I had to sit in rush hour traffic coming in very early in the morning, but we love doing this show, and it's worth doing because of your support. Now, we do say, every week, however you can support the Retro Hour podcast makes what we do worthwhile. That could even be as simple as, retweeting one of our tweets, telling a friend. I see that on Twitter all the time. A few people have done it this week, which is amazing, tagging their friends in. I think you'd enjoy the Retro Hour podcast.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of spreading it, and we'd really like to thank our donators as well, because without you guys, this show can't go ahead. You keep us churning along and support us.
Now, for making a donation of any amount, it obviously all 100% goes back into the running of the podcast, and it's completely optional as well. The show will always be free, but if you'd like to help us out into the running of the show, you can make a donation via PayPal. You'll find the link on our website at theretrohour.com, and for doing that, you will earn your place in the Retro Hour Hall of Fame and get a shout in a future episode. Just like this week,
John Piper,
Adam Dimmick,
David Wilde,
and Photon Storm Limited, who all made donations into the running of the show. And if you'd like to do the same, you'll find the link on the front page of our website at theretrohour.com. Now, while we're talking about amazing companies who support the Retro Hour podcast, we've got to give a big shout this week to Retrosoft Studios, who are kindly sponsoring the Retro Hour podcast this week. Now, we've timed this very well because WrestleMania kicks off this weekend.
Ah, yes. I used to love some of those old wrestling games.
Do you love wrestling in general back in the day?
Back in the day, I used to like it, yeah. So I remember the 90s. Was it the Attitude Era?
What, the early 90s you're talking?
The early 90s.
When it was WWF before WWE?
Yeah. They'd have Scotty 2 Hotty.
Yeah.
I remember him, The Undertaker.
Oh, he was scary, wasn't he?
There was a guy who had about 4 clowns as well.
We're trying to remember who he was, weren't we?
Yeah, and he used to come on stage and all these little clowns would come and jump all over everybody. But I also remember that there was a huge background of WWF and WWE games as well for the NES and the SNES.
But I remember playing it in the playground at school, you know, like we'd pretend to be like Jake the Snake. I remember doing like the Boston Crab on my mates, you know, needed a break in the back of the playground, and Hulk Hogan before he did Tropical Thunder and became not quite so cool anymore. But you're right, I mean, when video games came along, it meant that we didn't have to physically assault each other in the school playground, which was quite nice. Now, WrestleFest was one of the biggest games back then. You might remember that game, 1991, so that was right in the height of the WWF era. And there's this new game coming out, which is going to be called Retro Mania Wrestling. Now, it's by our good friends at Retrosoft Studios, and the aim of their company is to put a retro spin on modern games. So this new game they're bringing out is really a spiritual successor to WrestleFest. So, I mean, you're talking pick up and play arcade action.
This looks really cool because there's a lot of features in this game that wouldn't be in the original kind of wrestling games. Like there's ring entrances.
Yeah.
Because I remember that was a big thing that came later on, like entrance music and kind of being able to customize it. But it also looks like they've got a huge roster as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's already 12 to 16 playable wrestlers that they're going to aim to have at the launch of this game when it comes out. Already announced Hawk and Animal of the Road Warriors, Tommy Dreamer, Austin Idol, Zack Sabre Jr., already names that they've got announced that are going to be in this game. 12 to 16 playable wrestlers at launch. You look at the sprites as well. I mean, the graphics look incredible. Now, if you want to get a little early look at this game, it's not released yet, but you can check out the progress of it by going to their website, retromaniawrestling.com, and follow them on Twitter at Retrosoft Studio, and you can get a little look at the game in progress as well. And they tweet all the time. I mean, there's some really good stuff on their Twitter and their website if you want to check it out. So, I mean, perfectly timed in with WrestleMania kicking off and, you know, with this show as well. We love retro games that are getting updated for the modern era.
Yeah, totally.
Now, let's get into this week's news stories. It is really happening then. How long has this been rumoured for?
A long, long time. So this is the official Sega Mega Drive from Sega.
Yeah. First party, coming out on September the 19th. And the good thing is, at-games are not involved.
Yes, so they had at-games before, and as we mentioned last week as well, they had quite a bad problem with the sound, and you know, there was a little bit of lag and stuff like that. So we'll hope that Sega's did a good job, but they've got a bit of competition with the analog machine out there.
Well, I mean, this coming officially from Sega themselves, I think this is going to be a no-brainer if you're a Mega Drive fan. Now, there's actually going to be 2 different versions of it, as we expected. Same with, you know, Nintendo. There's going to be a Japanese release and one for the West as well. Coming out this September, they've already announced games that are going to be in the US version, and that will include Altered Beast, Sonic the Hedgehog, obviously, Space Harrier 2 is going to be in there, Echo the Dolphin, which I thought was quite an interesting choice. Because Echo, I mean, I was never a massive fan of it as a game to play, but graphically, it blew my socks off.
But everybody had it, didn't they, as well? It was one of those titles that even if people didn't play it, they'd be like, oh, just look how beautiful Echo is, you know? Yeah,
that's the thing. It's like, it was a bit of a graphical demo for the Mega Drive, wasn't it? Really pushed the system. Stuff like, you know, Sonic 2, Puyo Puyo 2 is going to be in the Japanese version as well.
And they're saying that they've got wired controllers now. Let's hope they don't make the mistake of the NES ones, which were tiny wired controllers, really close. The wires were quite short, weren't they?
Yeah, but what's interesting about this is, though, it's actually going to have, from what I've seen of the news reports, it will have a cartridge slot in there.
Ooh.
Which means that you can apparently play your original games in it, which is pretty nice.
That would be really cool, that would.
Like you said, they're going to be including wired controllers. But they're actually USB controllers, which I've seen some people kind of whinging a bit about. Like, it should be the old, the deconnector so you can plug the originals in. But actually having updated Mega Drive controllers that are USB compatible, you can probably use them on a PC and stuff as well. I think that's
they
a
had
positive.
those PlayStation ones as well, which were kind of USB, but they had the little end that made it look like a PlayStation controller.
The only weird thing is, though, the Japanese version is going to have the more advanced 6-button controller, but the one in the West End are going to have the original 3-button one, which is, I don't know why they've done that, but maybe something to do with the games.
Maybe there'll be like people ordering these Japanese ones just to get the 6-button controller and doing some eBay trading or something.
You know what? I think you might be right there, because collectors will want to have them both, won't they?
Yeah,
so they've got to make some differences, I guess. And they haven't announced too much information about the Western version yet, but we do know that the American version is going to cost $80.
Okay.
So it's not a bad price at all.
No.
And the thing about it is, Sega will do the presentation on this perfectly. It's going to have, Yuzo Koshiro, who did the music for Streets of Rage. He's going to do the menu music for the screen when you turn it on. And
like we've been saying, though, it's an open goal for Sega. They just needed to do this, and just to do it correctly. Yeah. And they just score straight away. You'll sell them and make a lot of profit.
It makes sense doing it, though. I mean, yeah, okay, it's a cash grab because everyone else has done it, but you'd want to own one of these. And, that's the thing. Sega, I think, have listened to the fans. They've listened to all the complaints about at games, and I think they're going to do it properly. So I'll be buying one, I think, even just to hack it.
I won't, because I've already got a Dreamcast, and that also has this one CD which has like every single game for all the old Sega systems.
The thing about mini consoles, you're right, you don't need them if you've got the originals, but there is just something about them. Yeah. I know Joe's going to buy like 3.
Yeah.
Joe's like the biggest Sega fan ever. So if you want to find out more about that, I mean, it's been all over. Like I said before, I even saw that on the BBC TV News on Saturday.
Wow.
So this has been like headline news. It came out just a little bit too late to get in last week's show. But if you want to find out more about the Mega Drive Mini, I'll put that in this week's show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, it seems every week on the show at the moment, we seem to be talking about new software, new titles being released for the NES, and there is yet another one coming out.
Yes, and this all seems to be down to this great piece of software, which is called NES Maker. So this is actually available for your PC, and it enables you to create brand new NES games, and you don't really need, much programming experience or anything like this.
Okay.
It's quite drag and drop, and you can flash it onto the original cartridges. So you can fully create your game in the PC, flash it onto your cartridge, and then run it on your NES yourself, which is absolutely amazing, I think.
Yeah, it's nuts.
And they've recently ran a competition called Bite Off 2019. So Bite Off was kind of a games competition about using NES Maker and seeing what these guys can create. And there's some really funny stuff in here. One of them is called Office Hero, and it's kind of like you have to quit your job and live in an RV. Right. That's the aim. And the aim is to escape the office.
And don't we all want to do that?
Yeah, you've got to find different routes of how to kind of escape the office. But I think this is really fun because, you can create your NES app. You can send it out there. You can have people download it to their own carts, or you could have it as a ROM for people to emulate.
Yeah.
And there's full tutorials available on this NES Maker site. I think it's really interesting.
I love the fact as well that with this Office Hero game, I mean, they've in this article, which is on vintageisthenewworld.com, which I'll link up in our notes. They've actually done the artwork in there as well, which looks like an original Nintendo cartridge artwork.
Yeah. It's like they've mocked up the front of it and everything. They've got all the original.
It's got the seal. It's got the seal on there, the quality seal. But also, they're offering apparently prizes to the first few players who can beat the game and find all 8 exits to win it. And he said they're going to be kind of, like traditional, really difficult puzzles like they were back in the old days. No hand-holding in this game at all. It looks like it might be a bit brutal. So that sounds really cool. I love the fact they're doing these kind of... You remember, back in the day, they do these kind of... it was competitions based on games, and you'd get the clues in magazines.
Yeah, but you'd also get stuff like shoot-'em-up construction kit, game construction kit. All these different kind of ways to make games. I remember there's quite a lot for the Amiga as well. I remember back then you'd kind of build them, but you'd also get map editors, wouldn't you? And you'd be able to do stuff. Well, this is fantastic because they also have 20-minute projects. So they have stuff like, an adventure game that you can code in 20 minutes without using any code. Simple platformer, shooters, maze games. It's quite cool.
See, for someone like me, they were always good as well, because I did make a few, admittedly really bad shoot-'em-up games in Suck, shoot-'em-up construction kit back in the day.
That's it.
And yeah, because I've never been great at programming, but stuff like that, you can just drag and drop little things around, and the satisfaction of having your own game running on the original hardware has got to be pretty cool as well. Now, speaking of the Amiga, which you mentioned then, there is another new game coming out from the team from Project R3D. Now, these were the team who were behind, again, that we reviewed on YouTube a couple of years ago, actually, didn't we? Just before we started doing this podcast, I think.
Yeah, Tanks Fury, which was a really cool little game. And this one is also a really nice title, but it's got this kind of really chunky, pixely kind of graphics that they've done. It looks quite modern, actually, and it's called Bridge Strike. Yeah,
and their graphical style is very recognisable, I think, isn't it? They kind of use these pastel colours.
Yeah.
And they look very well made. What's kind of the aim of this game then? So it's like a flight kind of game, is it?
Yeah, it just seems to be a kind of a shoot 'em up
right
style, bridge fighting kind of game. Different terrain, different weathers. It's got a full chiptune kind of soundtrack. Diverse and demanding missions. So I'm not quite sure with that one. I need to give it a play.
Well, that's the thing about this company, though. I mean, based on their past games, I played Worthy as well, which I believe was from the same team. Very high standard of games. That's one thing about new games that come out for all systems. These programmers have often worked with this hardware for decades. So they know it inside out, and they can get tricks out of it that you couldn't in games that came out like back in the 80s or 90s.
But also this is distributed in many different ways. So there's a boxed edition available, which is always beautiful if you're kind of collecting games. There's a ADF CD version, and also there's some extras, like you can download the MP3 files for the music and concept art and wallpapers and stuff. They always have a nice little package. I remember when we got Tanks Fury and they had a poster in there and they had a few other little items. There was a tiny tank in there.
Did we get like face paint and everything?
Yeah, war paint, yeah.
Yeah, I'll put that video. It's probably a bit cringe looking back at it now, but I'll link it up for people to check it out. Just before we started the retro hour, wasn't it? About probably 4 years ago now, I think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's great to see this company still, releasing games for the Amiga too. So if you want to find out more about that, I'll put that and everything else we talked about this week in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, before we get into our special guest this week, Shawn Mills, talking all about the history of Sierra Software, let's just take a moment to give a big shout to our good friends at Beer 52, the world's most popular monthly craft beer discovery club. Now, their aim is to search out incredible and exclusive small batch craft beers from the world's greatest breweries and bring them back to their members. Now, they've been big supporters of the Retro Hour podcast. And here's something that's going to make everyone's ears prick up. Free beer. Can we say better than that?
No.
Now, if you'd like to get your own case of free craft beer, all you have to do, nip onto their website at beer52.com/retro and claim a free case. Now, this is a perfect chance to get some extra special beers in. And as a Retro Hour listener, we've teamed up with them to bring you a free pack. Now, at the moment, they're doing lots of stuff. Obviously, we're based here in the UK. Europe's been on everyone's mind at the moment, whatever you think of Brexit, whatever the outcome will be. At the moment, they're celebrating the relationship between the UK and Europe by doing this amazing pack that they've got, which is Citizens of Everywhere. And they're bringing, beers from Europe, beers from the UK included as well. Whatever your flavour of beer as well, it could be dark beers, light beers, you could even have a mixed case if you like them all. And all you have to do, if you'd like to get your first case for free, you just have to pay the £5.95 postage, and you will get 8 incredible craft beers. Their Ferment magazine, that actually, I didn't realise how interested I was in beer until I flicked through their magazine. It's like so much in there, hearing about how it's made and the different flavours and stuff that are in there. And they'll even include a free snack in the box as well. Let's be honest, beer's nothing without a snack.
Good deal, that is, isn't it?
And you get next day shipping too, so no-brainer really, isn't it? So there's no minimum commitment. Take the free case if you want, try the beer, see what you think of it. If it's not for you, pause and cancel at any time. All you have to do to claim your free case today is head onto their website, beer52.com/retro. That's beer52.com/retro and claim your free case. Right then, let's get the history of one of the most infamous companies in the history of video games, Sierra, with this week's special guest, Shawn Mills. You're You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and this week we are covering one of the most infamous adventure companies. And, you know, we're massive fans of Sierra games, so it's our pleasure to welcome on this week. We're going to talk all about the history of Sierra and also about this amazing new book and Sierra remakes. So much we're going to cover this week with Shawn Mills. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Now, let's talk about your kind of early experience with Sierra. When did you first come across the company's games and the company itself?
Look, the first Sierra game I ever played, ever saw was Heroes Quest. And so that's actually, if you ever see me on Twitter and that, and I refer to Quest for Glory as Heroes Quest, that's the reason, because that's what it always was to me. Look, my dad actually brought a computer home from work. We didn't have a computer in the house. He was a trainer with Australia Post, so I had, National Postal Service here in Australia. And he brought a computer home and it had Heroes Quest on it. And I just fell in love with Hero Quest and just taught me to type and helped me to read. And, I just fell in love with the whole idea. And, it just went from there.
Did you kind of focus on adventure titles mainly because it had the kind of immersion and the real different style of playing, concentration and focus?
Well, Hero Quest appealed to me because I was a huge fantasy fan. I grew up, my dad read us, as little kids, my dad read us like the Narnia books and then the, Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and all that sort of stuff. So I love that. And it's still to this day, I love it. I'm 41, I love it all the time. But, so that appealed to me. And then I guess, the immersion, the story, the humour, what Laurie and Corey put into Hero Quest is the humour of it. It's so funny. Just the little puns, the witty puns. I was actually a huge fan of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
And there's a couple of good Hitchhikers jokes in the game as well. So that you would miss and just go past if you didn't know it, but it's there if you do. And I'm like, so that appealed to me. And then found out about the Space Quest games through friends of mine, and I love space and sci-fi and all that sort of stuff. Quintessential nerd here.
Aren't we all? Well, that's the thing about those adventure games about then. They really got your imagination going as a kid, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Probably even the Space Quest games more than the Quest for Glories was that just that whole idea. You get sucked right into it, and well, I did anyway. I get sucked right into it, and just you want to find out what happens next, and you want to sort of develop the story and that sort of thing. So it's definitely the immersion. I think that's something Sierra did really well that not many other people, even to this day, have managed. Is just create that immersion where you just get sucked right into it. So And
what about the hardware? I mean, what system were you playing these titles on?
I was playing that on a 286, 16 megahertz with the full 1 megabyte of memory. We had the upgrade from the 640K, 40 megabyte hard drive. We had VGA. That was a VGA monitor. So, no sound card, just the beeps and boops.
Mm-hmm.
So, very, very basic retro machine. Actually had the turbo button on the front, so, you could slow it down to, I think it was like 8 megahertz or something if the game was too fast.
It was always weird that the turbo button slowed it down, though, wasn't it? I think it was the other way around.
I think because people by default just leave it on. Yeah. I think that's what it was. So
Well, you mentioned you love the Quest games there, especially Space Quest as well, which was great with Roger Wilco. Did this lead you to exploring other Sierra games because their collection was so diverse?
Oh, look, it's I probably didn't realise how diverse the catalogue was until I researched the book that we'll talk about later. But Thexter was an early game, so I knew from day one that they did like arcade games, or I realise now that's a port of a Japanese title. But the other one I absolutely fell in love with was Jones in the Fast Lane. I still to this day pull it out and play it. I don't know why, but that era of Sierra games up until probably 92, 93, really, they're all great. There's just something, there's that little bit of, pixie dust or something, just a bit of magic to them that, at least for me, maybe it's partly the age I was when they came out. But, definitely. I think the other thing is you go into a shop back then, and you look at all the big boxes on the shelves, which, you don't really even get nowadays. And you'd have, 2 or 3 rows of Sierra games and a few LucasArts titles, a bit of the SSI Dungeons and Dragons or Panzer General, that sort of stuff, and a rack of shareware, and that was pretty much about it. So Sierra was always at the forefront of even just going into shops in the late 80s.
It was a box artwork as well that would draw you in, wouldn't it? That'd be the main thing that would often get your eye onto a game on the shelf.
Oh, absolutely. I remember what game was it? Freddy Farkas, which is actually the first game I ever bought with my own money, not, just pirated off someone. But, I just remember the artwork for that box and thinking, and it's a Western. And it's, I saw from the creator of Leisure Suit Larry, so I knew it would probably be a bit dirty, which appeals to like a 14 or 15-year-old mind. So, it did in my case anyway. So, yeah, the cover art for that. The other cover art I really love is just, actually I think it's the worst one they did, but I love it for that reason, is the King's Quest 2, which is just these different doors. And apologies to Mark Crowe because I know he drew that, but it's weird. But it appeals to you, yeah. It sticks out, and they were usually embossed, so you had that tactile feel to it, and yeah.
Would you buy any Lucasfilm titles as well?
Yeah, I had the first two Monkey Islands, which are just brilliant. Absolutely love them. I'm not one of these Sierra only, don't touch LucasArts. That seems to be a bit that way in fandom. You're one or the other. I think if it's a great game, I love it. So, I didn't get into a lot of their later titles. Actually, I got right into, off the adventure games, I got right into the X-Wing and TIE Fighter games. I spent... X-Wing is the reason I bought a mouse, because we didn't have a mouse to that point. This is back in the day when, that wasn't standard, because Windows wasn't really a thing. And that's the reason I bought a sound card as well, because there was no PC speaker on that one. So, and like Sierra, you look at the titles, you look at the companies back then, you go, oh, that's probably going to be good because of where it's from and who wrote it. So, yeah.
Well, Sierra had a tie-in with Disney as well, and they had titles like Black Cauldron and Winnie the Pooh in the 100-Acre Wood. What did you think of this deal, and why didn't it last?
My knowledge of the Disney deal comes from research and talking to people who were there. I didn't play any of those games when they first came out. They were sort of a bit before my time. I came in sort of 88, 89 when, as I said, Hero Quest came out. But... to answer your second question first, the reason they didn't work, the simple answer is they didn't make enough money for Sierra because they were splitting so much of the profits with Disney. When you look at the history of Sierra, if you take the rose-coloured glasses off and the nostalgia and all that away, Ken Williams is a brilliant manager and very, very good at making money and making the right decisions to make money. And that's fine because that's what that's what you have to do when you're a business. But I think the Disney deal, bottom line, just didn't make them enough money. A lot of creative issues there too. Disney, from what I understand, had a lot of influence, or wanted a lot of influence on the process, and to the point where, and Al Lowe told me this, and it's in the book, that he would get these messages through from notes. In movies or TV, you would call them notes from executives, and that's what they would get about the game. It's like, change the color of this, or make this minor change, and that, and they're all just little tweaks just to make these people who were assigned to oversee this stuff at Disney feel like they've been part of the process, even though they really weren't. And so I think there was a frustration there as well. Actually, funny story with Al, he did his final game, which was Donald Duck's Playground, completely just made it and presented it to Disney, and then they wanted to make these changes, and he's like, oh, look, it's already done. You can either sell it now and make money, or we're not going to be able to get back to it for ages and ages and ages. And he just basically did an end run around them and just got Ken to sign it off and put it on the shelf and sell it. So I think there was definitely a frustration with working with the Disney people, because they were assigned, Disney actually assigned it to their educational department. And so this is the department that made the little, Mickey Mouse, counting films for schools and all that sort of stuff. So they didn't really know, as most big companies didn't back in the day when computers weren't a big thing, they didn't know to what to do with it, what to do with computer games, what are computer games. So that, they didn't have like nowadays where they have their own division. Well, they own LucasArts as well, but back in the day they didn't. They just sort of pawned it off to these two old school teachers, as Al said.
And it always amused me as well that the guy who made Leisure Suit Larry was making Disney games. It was like, it couldn't have been more different, really.
It's such a contrast. I mean, he's and we alluded to this actually when we were just talking before we started started recording. Al Lowe is legitimately one of the funniest men I've ever had the privilege of speaking to, and I know you guys have had him on the show as well. Mm-hmm. And he is just so hysterically funny, but he's so broadly talented. It's not just, the sexual innuendo of Leisure Suit Larry. But, he's got his, he's a school teacher. He's a music teacher. He's a very accomplished musician. Saxophonist, is that the word?
Saxophonist?
But, plays saxophone. So, very, very accomplished in a lot of areas. So, really, really unique guy. But it cracks me up as well. And knowing that Ken Williams brought him to Sierra because he privately made on his own, with his own company, 3 little educational games based on sort of what Sierra was doing, and was selling them at trade shows before, when Ken got his interest. And then he ends up doing a remake of Soft Porn, which was, their most notorious titles.
Yeah. And that's the thing about Sierra, I guess. I mean, did you know, when there was different designers working on different games, did it kind of make the Sierra world a bit quite diverse and each game quite unique, do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was at least up until Ken sort of took his hand off. Ken had his hand in everything really a lot, right up until probably when Bill Davis started with the company as a creative director in the late, probably 1990, 91, around there somewhere. And I think Ken used to leave the designer alone. They were given, they might pitch the title to Ken and Ken goes yes or no, and then they're left alone to go and make the game, particularly in the really early days when you're talking those, the pre-King's Quest games like, Ulysses and the Golden Fleece and Time Zone and Cranston Manor and all those Mystery House, of course, with Roberta. He left the designer alone to just design the game, and they might only have 1 or 2 programmers. So I think that designer then comes through the game. So, Leisure Suit Larry is Al Lowe. Space Quest is so, Mark Crow and Scott Murphy. And I think as you go along into later years when they're, much bigger teams, you lose that. Except for the Al Lowe games. I think the Al Lowe games do keep that all the way through, right up to Larry 7. But I think you're definitely right. I think that distinctive designer feel comes through in every game. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned Ken and Roberta Williams there as well.
Yep.
I'm sure you're definitely going to mention them in the book.
A couple of times.
Could you briefly tell their kind of story?
So Ken and Roberta were basically they were living in Los Angeles, suburban Los Angeles, and Ken was he was actually building a programming language or something along those lines to sell. He's a very entrepreneurial guy. He'd established selling software and distributing software for other people as a different company before he started Sierra. Brought a computer home, and Roberta was like fascinated by the idea of computer games, and they'd played the text adventures like Colossal Cave and all that sort of stuff, and it just sparked Roberta's imagination, and she's like, Ken, I want to do this, but I want graphics. And Ken's like, not possible. And then, goes away and thinks about it and goes, no, actually, I think I could do it, and works out how to do it and store it in, those very small capacities. And really, really great programmers, particularly really brilliant Apple II programmer, and was able to, take 4 colours and dither them into like 16 colours on these 4-colour CGA palettes and all that sort of stuff. So very, very brilliant in that way. And, they did Mystery House. Roberta wrote it, Ken programmed it, and they sold it from home. And a long story short, it just went gangbusters. They got, send a box of them to Ken's brother John, who was employee number 3 for the company, and John used to stick boxes of them in the back of the car and take them around to computer shops, which were just starting to pop up around that time. And he's like, hey, I've got this game, loaded up in the shop, get people interested, see the crowd of people gather around it. And then, the people would go, oh, well, I'll buy 10 copies or I'll buy 20 copies off you. The great thing about Ken and Roberta is they were the whole company for its entire life. But particularly in those early days, they were the company, and they had their home phone number on the hint line. So people would ring in and they would actually get Roberta Williams on the phone. You can't imagine that nowadays, but you get Roberta Williams on the phone, or the designer. She wasn't a name back then, so the designer of the game on the phone, and she established that pattern of giving out progressively less vague hints. Starting vague and working up to just smash them in the face with the answer type. Like the hint books used to be. That's how she did that. So yeah, they did that, and then they moved out to Course Gold, Oakhurst, and went through a few things there and set up. They had some family out there. They had, I believe it was Roberta's family had an apple orchard or something along those lines out near Oakhurst, so they established the business out there, which was really great for the centrality of all these arty type people gathered together making games and, making money together and partying and all, real frat house type atmosphere in those early days. That was really an advantage, but when it became big business in the 90s, it was a decided disadvantage because for example, they only had one T1 internet line into the town, and it would only take a storm to knock it out, and they wouldn't have internet access for or any anything. And this is even in 95 when they're running like the Sierra network, Imagination network, and they're running that out of Oakhurst, and it might go down because of a thunderstorm for 4 days, or a blizzard, or
not good.
I'm trying to think how John Williams put it. He said, or some Yahoo would shoot out the telegraph poles on a Friday night, and you'd be out without phones and internet for 3 or 4 days till they fixed it.
Yeah, no one can work for a week because of that. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So,
well, talking about underrated Sierra games, I mean, Ravi and I were talking before we started recording actually about games like Codename Iceman that you never see mentioned in like retro gaming reviews and stuff. I mean, for people who might not know about that game, tell us a bit about it and like any you think are underrated.
Oh, look, I think Codename Iceman is underrated, but I think it's underrated because it's a bad game. To be honest, Codename Iceman is one of those games. I'll just go back a step. Ken Williams, as I said, he was a really brilliant manager, but also really good on ideas. And Corey Coles, who designed the Quest for Glory games with his wife, he told me that basically you waited for a third time when Ken instructed you to do something. So Ken would come to you with an idea and say, I'd like to implement this. And then he'd go away. If he came back and you'd go, yeah, Ken, that's a great idea, but don't do anything about it. If he came back a second time, you go, well, I should file that away because he might be quite serious about it. But if he comes back a third time, that's when you go ahead and actually do it because he's really serious about it. Because he had a lot of, I don't want to say flights of fancy, but something would grab his attention. He's like, we could do that and we could do it better and cheaper and make a bucket load of money out of it. One of his ideas was he's like, well, we do, we got the Leisure Suit Larry type games, we got role playing, we've got this, we've got that, we've got fantasy, etc. We should do Secret Agent. And so he goes to Jim Walls, who's a retired cop, and goes, you like the James Bond movies, don't you? Yep. Make a Secret Agent game. And that's like, even saying it right now, I'm like, that's even unbelievable in my mind that that's how games were made or that's how games were launched. It's like, I'd like a Secret Agent game. Go make one. And so they went out and made that. They had a lot of trouble with that game. A lot of a lot of technical issues. The whole second half of the game is pretty much unplayable on modern machines, or even at the time, because they tried to do a simulation machine within their own framework, coding framework, which didn't work. It's got some beautiful backgrounds. I'll give it that, though. It's got some beautiful backgrounds and some great music. But and they did mood a sequel. It was going to be codenamed Phoenix, was the second game, but they just never made it because it didn't make enough money. Underrated titles, I think the two Manhunter games, I think they are criminally underrated. I think they are absolutely brilliant. If not the best that Sierra did, but certainly up there. The whole concept of, alien invasion, post-apocalyptic world, and very rarely done in computer games at the time. It's a bit overdone nowadays, but I think they're really underrated games. Gold Rush, I actually played Gold Rush at school. I realised many years later that, and I even did it today, talking to you guys, Heroes Quest is my first game. It's probably technically not, because I'm pretty sure we played Gold Rush at school as a, one of those fun educational things when you've got a cool teacher in school. So I think Gold Rush is an underrated one. And I think some of their sort of arcadey type games, people think Sierra, they think adventure games. I think they did some amazing arcade games. As said, Jones in the Fast Lane, I think is just very unique. There's still nothing like that out there nowadays. I love the Thexter ports. I like Zeliard. Well, yeah, there's probably others.
Sierra seemed very kind of fast on uptaking new technology, especially CD-ROM, with the edutainment title Mixed Up Mother Goose. Yeah. Well, why do you think this is, that they were so fast with tech?
Well, Ken Williams' philosophy for Sierra was to always be at the forefront. Don't play catch-up. Always be at the forefront of the industry. Always be at the front and lead the way. Sierra actually developed a lot of those technologies that they moved forward with, or they were very, very early instigators of it. Like CD-ROM technology, I don't know if they were the first CD-ROM game. There's a bit of doubt about the timing. Could be another one called The Hole, I think, by I think it's Broadband. But I mean, they were very early on. You're right. Mixed Up Mother Goose and King's Quest V was their big launch title with that. So I think Ken liked pushing the technology. He liked to always be, always show off something new. You look at the series of progressions. You go into sound cards in King's Quest IV from just these beeps and boops. They go to the full MIDI sound card in King's Quest IV, because Roberta goes, well, these are a cinematic game, Ken. I'd like proper music in it. So he makes a game with music in it. I think they basically had an idea and decided on the idea. They liked the idea, and instead of bringing the idea back to the technology, they built the technology or developed the technology up to the point where they could implement the idea. And I think it's probably backwards to the way we do a lot of things nowadays, but I think that's what it is. Ken just liked being at the forefront. And if you look at when Sierra started to decline, it's when they stopped being at the forefront, and it's when they started playing catch-up and trying to, we need an online role-playing game because we see them coming down the pipeline with Blizzard and whatever. We need to do a shooter because everyone else is doing a shooter. And, stuff like that. I think at the time they didn't look at any of that. They just said, no, this is the way we're heading. This is the idea. Let's get there. And I think that's probably why they were at the top of the game for so long.
They also seem to look back at themselves on technology. So they had the SCI, which was the creative interpreter, and they later developed the adventure game interpreter and started kind of retroactively fitting games and also redoing them. So they were doing the Police Quest 1 Redux.
Yeah, and I remember it was a Leisure Suit Larry collection in like 97.
And it was all, new VGA versions and stuff. What did you think of those titles at the time and that strategy?
Myself, I liked them. I mean, I enjoyed the Quest for Glory 1 remake. I think it's probably the best of all their remakes. Probably, I don't love it quite as much, but I've got that nostalgic thing for the original. I think they were all very good. It's a matter of bottom line with the remakes, it was about money. Again, it was about money. It's they figured that they had the code base there, they had the artwork, they had the design, so they didn't need to really employ a designer. And so they just like, do a paint over of this game was sort of the idea. But it turned out to be, well, actually, you've got to really design the whole game. When you move from a parser typing interface to a point and click, it's a different game. So, and then in others like the Police Quest 1 remake, they reused a lot of assets from Police Quest 3, which was concurrent. They released all of those remakes. They started the remakes when VGA came in. So King's Quest V is their first VGA game. What you need to understand about how Sierra made money was back in the day before King's Quest V, everything before King's Quest V, they'd release new titles, but the bulk of their money was made in their catalogue. So, in the older titles still sitting on the shelf. And it was something along the lines of like 60 or 70% of their entire revenue came from the older titles, not the new releases. They would get a boost at Christmas with the new King's Quest or whatever, but the bulk of the money came from the old titles. When VGA hit, all of those 16-colour EGA games just fell off a cliff, and they dropped down to practically nothing. So overnight, big chunk of their revenue is just wiped out because of the advent of this new technology, which Sierra had pushed. So then the idea is, well, we've still got these old games, we'd like to sell them. Can we update them? So that was the idea, and they thought it would be a cheap process, and it wasn't. You can talk to the two guys about it for the Space Quest remake, but they would have Crow and Murphy on the box, or two guys from Andromeda, but they both had very, very little, if anything, to do with the game. So it was just an advertising thing to use their names, but yeah, it was really about trying to get some more money. I don't want to say milk more money, but get more money out of the old titles. But personally, I love them all. I'm not a huge fan of Space Quest 1. I'm not a big fan of that 50s sort of sci-fi look. But then there's that, there's a vista shot, which is just cliffs on this desert planet in the original, where they turned into the bones of like this great big dinosaur-y type alien creature that you climbed instead. And I just think that's brilliant. I love it. And I've seen the original sketch of that, which is one big picture, whereas in the game it's divided into rooms, so it's split into like 8 or 9 different pictures. But so they did some really amazing stuff with those, but the main impetus behind it was just again, it was money and trying to sell their old games.
Well, talking about kind of cutting edge technology that Sierra used. I mean, when we got into the mid '90s, we had the whole the FMV craze came along, and
yes.
Some of their games like SWAT used it. I mean, did you think that kind of suited Sierra's style? And I imagine that must have been quite pricey to produce.
I believe that Phantasmagoria at the time was the most expensive game ever created to that point.
Like 7 CD-ROMs, was it, or something?
7 CD-ROMs or something crazy like that. I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've ever finished it. I get a little bored with the FMVs because you can't skip the scenes. You need to watch them, and it turns into a 7 or 8 hour movie. So it has to be captivating me all the time. I have a low attention span though, so it might be that. Look, I think it's just another example of they thought that that would be the future. I think they'd seen it used sparingly. Other companies had started to play with it, and they said, "Oh, this is one of those technologies they didn't develop, but I think they really pushed for a while." So, Phantasmagoria, Gabriel Knight, the second Gabriel Knight, SWAT, they were really good sellers for them, but I think interest from the public dried up more than anything else. I think it was one of those sort of passing fads just with the general public. They liked them for a while and then, lost interest in them. Phantasmagoria was their biggest selling game, period, in the history of Sierra. So it definitely worked.
Well, I think you probably think of that, and people have just got CD-ROM drives and graphics cards, and they want them to show it off and push the limits, I guess. Yeah,
that's probably true. You're starting to get into probably your double-speed CD-ROM drives, maybe, or even the fourth. Remember when we actually cared about the speed of the CD-ROM drive? I wonder sometimes nowadays what our CD-ROM drives actually spin at. But anyway, I don't know about you guys. Mine was a Caddy.
Yeah.
I had a Caddy CD-ROM.
Yeah, to open a little box and put the disc in and close it. And,
yeah.
I remember, yeah.
Well, in those final years of Sierra, just before they were kind of under Activision, they did 3D games, and there were these kind of CGI titles like Gabriel Knight 3 and Leisure Suit Larry Magnum Cum Laude. What did you think of these titles? Was it kind of a last gasp to stay relevant?
Yeah, look, Gabriel Knight 3 is actually the last adventure game. If you think of Sierra, and I think we all do think of the adventure games, there's the 6 big series that they did. And Gabriel Knight 3 is the last of those 6 big series. I think it's a great game. I think, unfortunately, the technology today doesn't hold up. I think back then it was fine, but yeah, today I don't think it holds up, whereas I think the older games do hold up. So, when those almost cartoony graphics of the 16 or 256 colours, you get away with that. It's like watching an old Hanna-Barbera cartoon. It's, it is what it is, and you just accept that, whereas I think the 3D is a bit of a problem. It's a little clunky at times. Quest for Glory 5 is the other one. The big problem with those games for Sierra as a company was that they cost so much to make because they decided they didn't want to use their internal SCI engine anymore by that stage. So they had to build the engine as well as the game from the ground up, particularly Gabriel Knight 3. The production story of that game is just horrendous. Jane Jensen, obviously one of the great designers, had written the Bible of the game, written the game and had everything worked out how she wanted it done. But the engine itself was just, they developed a prototype. So one programmer, had developed this prototype of an engine to showcase what they wanted to be able to do. And then he sort of left the project and moved on to something else. And the next team came in and just kept building upon this prototype, and it became this just completely unwieldy mess where it was taking, like 3 minutes to even get past the loading screen when they were trying to run the game and compile the game. And they actually eventually, it's a pretty big story, but the bottom line is they had to scrap the engine completely and start from scratch and program it all. What we've got today was programmed in like 6 months for a 3-year production. I think they were trying. I think they saw that the downturn was on for adventure games, or what they perceived as the downturn of adventure games was in full effect by then, and they were trying to make a modern adventure game that would sell. And Gabriel Knight 3 sold pretty well, but long production times, very limited replayability in adventure games. So it's cheaper and easier to push out a shooter.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Everyone wanted FPS games and all that around that time, didn't they? It seemed.
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting little stories, and I actually got this from John Romero, who is one of the Johns from id that did Doom and Wolfenstein and all that, and he actually said that Ken Williams made an offer for for id at one point after they'd released Wolfenstein. He saw Wolfenstein in the office and it was being played, and he's like, well, none of my staff are getting any work done because they're playing this game. So he found out about them, saw them at this show or something, and said, look, I'll give you this bucket of money for id. This was sort of the time he was starting to acquire other companies. And the guys went back and they're like, oh, yeah, yes, no. And they decided that they would probably sell and went back to Ken, and Ken's like, oh, no, passing fantasy, don't worry about it. and this was like, 6 months before they released Doom. And so they're at this show where Doom had just swept the awards. And Romero comes up to Ken Williams and goes, oh, shake his hand and say g'day and whatever. And John's like, oh, I remember you were going to buy the company. And Ken's like, yeah, really fucked that one up, didn't I?
That's kind of like Decca Records missing out on the Beatles, isn't it? It's a bit similar to that.
Exactly. But you can't. Every hit can't be a winner.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know.
And it might have been different. You never know if that happened.
Oh, look, how would it have gone? I think they had a completely different, company philosophy than Sierra. Anyway, I don't know how they would have worked, but Ken did leave the companies he bought alone to a great extent to keep doing what they were doing, because he bought them because they were doing something that he liked. So he bought Papyrus because they were doing car racing games, and he thought we need to have an edge in that market. And he bought Dynamics because they were doing, simulators, the BattleTech stuff, and he thought we need an edge in that market. And they know what they're doing. People like Damon Sly and all that at Dynamics, they're brilliant people. So don't hamper them with extra rubbish, extra red tape or anything like that. Just let them do what they do and give them the money to do it, and he'll make me money.
Well, after the Sierra glory days, I mean, obviously Sierra heavily influenced you. Tell us a bit about Infamous Adventures then, this company that you started in 2004. Was that to kind of continue like that kind of inspiration of those Sierra games?
Yeah, look, actually, the whole story of that predates Infamous Quest. So Infamous Adventures was this fan company that me and my now business partner, Stephen Alexander, we just met on like some adventure game fan forums, and we just started talking one day about this. How awesome would it be if we were playing Hero Quest and we connected on that sort of spiritual level, and the fact that we both call it Hero Quest? And how cool would it be if you're the villain and you just go into town and you kill crap and kill the sheriff and go out and just run havoc, and these sort of college university days when you think of these sort of weird ideas. But we struck up a friendship, and then we realized we started to make the game, and we realized that there's no way possible. We have no idea what the hell we're doing. So we thought, well, what we can do is go back and look at some of the classic Sierra titles, and maybe try to just reprogram in a modern engine King's Quest 3, which was the one we chose. And we learned how to do that, and we had other people come on board to update the graphics, and we ended up releasing our remake of King's Quest 3, which was really, really awesome, because the only other group that had actually released a remake at that point was a group calling themselves Tierra, which became AGDI, who are still around and doing great things. So we released King's Quest 3, and that was it was really well received. We had to get extra download servers when that came out, and again sort of ignored this whole Quest for Infamy idea, which was our original go into Spielberg and kill people idea, and decided, well, Space Quest 2, we just love that. So, and we made Space Quest 2 and we released it, and it was really, really popular. But we actually felt really competent by that stage that we had the ability to design a game, because we'd made this progression. In King's Quest 3, we made it as close as we could to the original. That was our intended goal. And I'm fairly happy to say we achieved that, except with the spell system, but I will still argue that the spells in the original game were just copy protection, so typing all that rubbish out of the manual.
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't have changed it to just a click, because it is like a third of the game, but that's a decision you make at the time, and I'm not going to change it now. So, but Space Quest 2, we redesigned the whole second half of the game. So the whole section of the asteroid, which we thought was very barren and bare and, just felt a bit rushed, which in retrospect, having talked to Scott and Mark, probably was a bit rushed, because Ken's like, where's my new game? We've got to get a Space Quest on the market. It's nearly Christmas. It's October. It's got to be on the shelves by November. So it was probably the reason. But, we redesigned that entire asteroid, and we had a lot of fun in that design process and just making it all fit. And by that stage, we felt competent enough that we could actually pull off a game, and we decided to make the biggest, most ridiculously massive project in Quest for Infamy, translating it to a original setting so that we could actually sell it. And we went commercial with that game. It did quite well. And but that was that game, Quest for Infamy, is firstly it's a labour of love. It's absolutely huge. I think just physically the number of rooms and animations is probably like 5 or 6 times the amount that are in the original Heroes Quest. And, very deep and convoluted plot that I swear people, I still think there's things in that game that we put in that people haven't found yet. And it's been out for, 4 or 5 years now. But we made this game with an amazing team that we assembled, which was pretty much the core of our team is the same ones that have been with us since day one. With King's Quest 3. So we'd all sort of developed together, and we're all quite, we're all good friends and that. So, we came out with Quest for Infamy, which is just this massive monstrosity of a game. But I'm immensely proud of it. I absolutely love it. But it is all about our love for Hero Quest, our love for pretty much everything the Coles have touched, and gave me one of the joys of my life is striking up a friendship with Corey in particular, and just having some conversations with him over time. And the other person is Scott Murphy, who when we released Quest for Infamy, actually on release day did a live stream, just us, but he joined our live stream and just sat there and talked to us for like 8 or 10 hours about all things Sierra and our games and just life in general and all that sort of stuff. A bit of their space venture and all that sort of stuff. So it was as honestly, that conversation is one of the highlights of my life. It's crazy that I can sit there in a conversation with one of these heroes of mine who designed the most amazing games. I love the Space Quest games. So,
And have you ever had contact with Ken or anything? Find out what he thought of your games or?
Not with regards to the games. With regards to the Sierra book, I've spoken to Ken. He's a hard man to track down because he's got a boat and he loves travelling. So if he's not at home in Seattle, he's in Mexico or Canada or somewhere else. But yeah, not with regards to the game. Probably the Sierra people who've spoken about our games, as I said, Scott, Josh Mandel, who's legitimately one of the nicest guys I've ever had the privilege of talking to. Such a great help. Gave us some really good advice early on, and so did Scott, actually. Scott gave me some brilliant advice, which he'd received from Roberta, so I feel like, that's pretty cool, which was basically make sure you have your ending in mind when you start your game, because when you design your puzzles, you want to design them backwards. Because you want the player to end up with this item, how are they going to get this item? And sort of work your way backwards from there. So something simple when I say it, but it's really profoundly changed the way I design puzzles. Scott and Josh are probably the two people that I've spoken to most. Actually, Garuka Singh Kasala, I think it's pronounced. Anyway, Garuka was producer, the first producer at the Sierra, and he's played my games and really love them as well. So,
wow, that's awesome, though, isn't it? That's a real kind of must be kind of validation, quite a bit, that you've done the right thing with them. And
big time. Josh actually, Josh voiced King Graham for us in our King's Quest 3 remake, because he did King Graham in the proper King's Quest 5 CD-ROM edition, and he voiced King Graham again in our King's Quest 3 remake, and enjoyed it so much he did David Letterdroid in our Space Quest 2 one.
Like a childhood dream come true having these guys work with you, I imagine.
Absolutely. Josh is, as I said, amazing. I mean, I'm a huge fan of both Freddie Farkas, probably one of, in my top 5, and Callahan's Cross Time Saloon, because I love the Callahan novels, and I didn't realise for many years that Josh was the designer on that for Legend, I think it was. So just getting to chat to him about that stuff. It's really hard not to fanboy out. That's the hardest part I had. Even when I did the interviews for the book and I'm talking to these people, some of them, that's fine. They're just the people who've worked for the company, but some of these names that I would see float up the screen time and time again, it's like, and I'm a trained journalist by trade, so I'm used to interviewing and talking to people. It's just, it's a bit, you don't want to fanboy out. I usually make a point of it at the end of the interview. I'd be like, look, thanks so much for talking to me. I've got to say, and I'm going to preface this right now by saying that this is my fanboy moment, and so I'm about to, just verbally spew all these questions at you that you need to answer for me. So.
I mean, we have teased the book quite a bit there. Let's get into the Kickstarter and the book that you're writing about Sierra.
Yes.
Then, I mean, what can we expect from this, and who's going to be in the book, and kind of what's the vibe of it? What's it all about?
Okay, well, look, the book came from the conversation. The idea for the book came from the conversation that I had with Scott Murphy in that conversation we just talked about a few minutes ago, and he was just telling us some of these little-known stories, and I'm like, it's not just the history of these games. This is a company that mattered in our, if I could put it as our social history. This is a company that was there. I think it's a microcosm of the computer industry, the gaming industry, the 1980s, so, Reagan, Thatcher type commercialism that was, in industry at the time. I think it's just so interesting. And I thought every time I'd look for information on it, there's nothing out there. There's interviews around with people where they drop tidbits here and there. There's a journalist by the name of, I think it's Stephen Levy, wrote Hackers back in like 1983 or 84 or something, which has a really big section on the early history of Sierra, but it predates King's Quest 1. So we're not even talking the golden era of Sierra. We're just talking like the really early years, which are just as fascinating. But and sort of over the years, I just kept thinking about this idea, and I'm like, you know what? I'm a journalist. I've spent all this money on this degree that I don't use in my real life to any great extent. Let's just write the damn thing myself. So I thought, big ideas, and the first person I approached was Josh, and he's like, absolutely. And interviewing him first, which was a great interview because Josh is so easy to talk to, and it's probably not the greatest interview I've ever conducted, but it was great and got a lot of good stuff out of him. Opened a lot of doors for me with other people. Just being with Josh's permission, just being able to drop his name and say, look, I'm writing this book, but and I do have some. Here's some of the credence. I've already interviewed Josh for it, and he's recommended you or said you were important in the company at this point, or whatever. Probably word it nicer than that, but so it opened a lot of doors. So that was the idea behind the book. I wanted to read it. That's really what it is. I wanted to read the book. I wanted to know the history. I think I'm a bit OCD. I like to know everything. So I just wanted to know it all. And if the only way I could get that was to do it myself. There's been a lot of attempts at a book or a documentary or a film or whatever that have not happened or that I haven't seen. I don't know. There's possibly half a dozen things sitting off in the background somewhere that people are still working on, about to release, which would probably be about my luck. But I'd never seen anything, and I couldn't see anything coming up, so I just decided to write it myself.
And when can we expect it then?
I used to say the book was finished because it was. I have the manuscript of the book, and it's 130,000 words, so it's not a small book.
Wow.
And I don't cover a lot of stuff either because you got to pick and choose. I had to just say I can't touch dynamics because that's a book in its own right. I mention them, of course, but, I can't go into detail there or anything like that. So I had this manuscript, and I've got this manuscript, and there was a number of people that I really, really wanted to interview. Obviously, Sierra has the 6 big adventure titles, so I wanted to at least cover all those people. and I couldn't quite get all of them. And somebody I really wanted to talk to was Scott Murphy, and it's fairly public knowledge that he's had some health issues of late, so he wasn't able to, but he's able to now have a talk to me. And Scott is such an important person in the history of the company because he was there from day one. You know, he started working in their disc copying rooms, literally taking a disc out of the drive and putting the next one in and just copying them and, you know, whacking the labels on the discs and stuff like that, and worked his way up to, I don't know if he was a head of studio or something like that, but, you know, very high up, right through designing and Space Quest, of course. And, you know, so a lot of history there, and he's a great guy, and I really wanted to talk to him. So I've got that interview teed up in the next couple of weeks to have a chat to Scott, and then I'll have to obviously transcribe that and sort of edit the book a bit. So, yeah, look, I want it to be out. Look, it'll be out this year. I guarantee that. Probably, you know, looking at the late end of the year. I've got the printing set up and the ebook stuff set up. The reason I'm running a Kickstarter on it, I just want to be able to pay a professional editor to edit the book and make sure my words make sense. There's a little bit of money involved. It's not going to be a massive amount of money in the Kickstarter, and I'm working at sort of a pre-order system as well. So there's that as well, and they'll be able to get it in paperback, hardback, or electronic.
Well, Shawn, I think anyone that's listened to this interview will be, you know, dying to get hold of a copy of the book and really excited about it. So as soon as you do get a date and it's live, I mean, obviously let us know, and we'll put it out there in our show notes and on our social and everything as well. So it's been amazing getting the stories of Sierra, though, and catching up with you, Shawn. So thank you so much for joining us this week.
Hey, thank you very much for having me. It's a great show you guys have got. So I'm happy to be on it.